Hey, I'm Lana from Lana Glowshot Art, and in this video, we're unboxing the November 2025 Sketchbox. This month is all about color mixing and gouache. Ready to get into it? Let's go. The surface in this month's box is the Stillman & Byrne Beta Series Mixed Media Paper. Your pack includes 15 sheets of 270 GSM paper. This is a very sturdy surface that will be perfect for both wet and dry media. Next, we have a 15 milliliter tube of M-Gram Artist's Gouache in Burnt Umber. This professional honey-based gouache pairs beautifully with the Shinhan Professional Designer's Gouache. Your colors include permanent yellow, cobalt green pale, Prussian blue, and carmine. We also have the SketchBox Signature Bright Brush size 4. This is a great brush for gouache paints because it's stiff and sturdy so it can handle that thicker paint, but you can also turn it on its edge and create really precise lines and details. The honey in this burnt umber keeps the paint moist a little longer and allows it to glide beautifully on the page. It also helps it reactivate a little bit more easily if it dries on your palette. Here, I'm swatching permanent yellow straight out of the tube with the broad side of my brush. Even though gouache looks a lot like watercolor, when you use it undiluted, you can create really thick, bold textures. And here, I'm gradually adding some water in so I can play with different consistencies. Different parts of your painting and process are going to call for different levels of opacity and different thicknesses of your paint, and it's good to get a feel for that in each color. All of these Shinhan colors are bold and mixed together to create a wide range of beautiful secondary and tertiary hues. Here, I started my color mixing warm-up by exploring a range of greens. I began with permanent yellow and added just a touch of Prussian blue, enough to shift the yellow towards a bright lime green. Then, for each box, I gradually added a bit more Prussian blue. This deepened the hue because Prussian blue is darker, and it also pulled it towards a truer green. I then repeated the same process with yellow and cobalt green pale to build a second gradient, exploring a whole new range of greens. When working with gouache, keep in mind that any color you mix on your palette can be re-wet and reused even days later. If you have space to leave mixed colors on your palette, this can save you time and help you get the most out of your paints. And if you ever need to clear some space for new mixes, you can easily wipe away dried gouache with a damp paper towel. Next, I'll explore mixing oranges, again starting with the permanent yellow as my base and gradually adding carmine. Warm-ups like this are incredibly helpful when working with a limited palette because they allow you to see the full spectrum of colors available before you begin your piece. This not only helps you choose the right subject matter, but it also gives you a clear sense of your color story, and it builds confidence before you ever put your brush to the paper. Here, I'm mixing a bit of Prussian blue and a bit of burnt umber to make my orange a bit deeper. Adding in those darker value colors will help me not only deepen the value of my color, but it will also help my color become more neutral. My next color mixing scale combines permanent yellow and burnt umber, which completes all of the possible two-color mixes using yellow as the base. After that, I mixed burnt umber with cobalt green pale, which created some really beautiful muted blue greens. And finally, I explored purples by combining carmine with cobalt green pale. After seeing just how vibrant and varied these mixes can be, it's no surprise that this month's prompt is Peacock. These paints were chosen specifically to help you achieve the rich jewel-like tones found in peacock feathers. Next, we'll take these colors and start exploring brush techniques as we paint a single peacock feather together. For this feather, I began with my lightest colors, which include a yellow gold and a yellow green. And then I will continue with my medium colors and finish with my darkest colors. For the larger chunks of color, I'm using the flat side of my brush and laying down thick strokes, but always on top of dry paint so that my new color doesn't mix with the previous color underneath it. Then for those feathery strands that come off the core of the feather, I'm turning the brush on its side and allowing it to just glide across the paper. To achieve a more airy look in the feather, I don't always have these strands completely consistent from the base all the way to the tip. Instead, I might ease up on the pressure, making it thinner, or even allowing the line to disappear. This is called a broken line, and it allows the viewer to fill in those gaps on their own, resulting in a really pleasing experience for the viewer and an opportunity for the artist to not have to draw every single little detail, which might make this feather feel a little clunky. Now that we've talked a bit about the brushwork and the techniques that you can use to achieve the textures in this feather, let's go back and discuss color selection. Of course, we're working from light to dark, but let's talk specifically about the colors we're using. A lot of these come from the color mixing exercise earlier in this video, and in each part of the feather, I'm using a variety of different tones. So on this left side, I'm using some greens, but I'm also using some browns, and this allows that part of the feather to be really dynamic. I don't always have to use the exact right green in the exact same place as my photo reference. Instead, I'm using that photo reference as a jumping off point and for inspiration. Then, once I feel pretty good about this feather, I'm coming in with my very darkest color, which is a combination of Prussian blue and burnt umber. And I'm using it to really push my darks and emphasize that core that comes through the center of the feather. Now that we're more familiar with using gouache and mixing colors, let's put it all together to paint this peacock. The first thing I do is to map out the proportions with a light sketch. Here I'm using the pink Coal Erase colored pencil from the August 2025 box. As I always suggest, I want you to begin with basic shapes, and then once your proportions are established, you can add more detail. Because gouache is opaque, you don't need to have everything perfect because you can cover up little errors with your opaque paint. But I do want you to prioritize where the white is going to be on this peacock and that you clearly mark that out. Because there isn't a white gouache in this set, we will be using the white of the paper. So we want to make sure that we know exactly where the white will be before we come in with paint. Once the sketch is complete, I begin to lay in washes of color. A wash of color is a thin, diluted layer of color that has a lot of water in it, and these can be easily layered over the top with opaque paint. They allow me to create a really nice base that I can then add on top of and adjust as needed throughout the process. One thing that I've done specifically with this Prussian blue base layer is to reserve the whites around the peacock's face. I want to keep these white throughout the entire process, so I really take my time going around these areas. Next, I shift to the washes of lime green in the background, and this is a combination of my permanent yellow and Prussian blue. I will be layering all the other colors on top of these feathers, so it's fine to block in the basic shapes and to get a sense for where those little lines that come off the base of the feather could be. I don't have to do every single one of those little lines right now. I'll just focus on creating a blueprint on where these lines could be so that I can layer over the top with future layers and colors. In addition to reserving my whites in this base layer, I also want to block in my darks. And here I mixed up a violet with a combination of carmine and Prussian blue, and I used this to help me establish the darks on the beak and also the darks in the eye. Once I had this base layer in, I kind of treated the peacock a little bit like a landscape, and I worked from the background forward because I really wanted to make the face pop away from the feathers, and I knew that there was a lot of detail that I was going to be competing with this huge tail. I began with a golden color, which was a combination of the permanent yellow, a bit of carmine, and then some Prussian blue to neutralize it. And I made this paint a little bit more opaque by not adding as much water. I mapped those golden eyes throughout the tail, and while I had this golden color mixed up, I pulled it through those little lines and texture in the feathers, and when I use this golden color throughout, I'm able to create more cohesion and harmony in the background. As I work on the eyes of these feathers, I'm working from thin to thick. So this cobalt green pale is quite thick, just a tiny bit of water, and then I add straight Prussian blue over the top. I am painting wet into wet here, and that's gonna help me soften the edges a little bit, but I'm not applying too many brush strokes or else that might start making the edges fuzzy. I just want them to be soft enough so that they are a little bit further back than the focal point, which is the peacock's head. We've discussed painting peacock feathers in great detail at this point, so I'll just remind you to allow your marks to be thin, maybe even invite some broken lines in there, and use a wide variety of colors, not just your greens. Include some browns and some violets to help you add more depth and dimension and to help you neutralize some of the intensity. Once I have my background about 90% done, I can allow it to dry while I come into the peacock's face and map in the darks. This super dark, rich blue is a combination of Prussian blue and burnt umber, and that allows it to stay really neutral, but as I transition into some of the lighter areas, I can add more Prussian blue to add more intensity. Painting these shadow shapes early on can give the bird more depth and dimension and allows it to begin to look 3D. In addition to working on the head, I also transition into the feathers in the crown, and I map those darks in as well so that they can stand out and away from the feathers in the background. While those darks are still a little bit wet, I'm going to transition into my mid values or my halftones. These are a combination of the Prussian blue and the cobalt green pale. To keep that feathery texture, I don't want to overblend here. Instead, I'm using kind of a dabbing motion so that I can get the texture of the feathers. And then I transition from those darkest areas towards the lighter areas. If the edges of my shadow shapes dry before I have a chance to come in with my mid-value colors, that's all right. I can always add some darker Prussian blue on the edge, and I can work back and forth into the light shape and the dark shape to create those transitionary tones. As I finish up the face of the peacock, I do so with really thick light blue paint, and I glob that on in the lightest areas. One thing that I really like about gouache is the opportunity to add texture with thicker paint. Here I'm transitioning to painting the beak, and this is one of those areas where we're going to need to be a little bit more creative with our color. I see grayish pinks in the photo reference, and I can't mix those colors up on my palette. So instead, I'm going to play around with oranges and maybe just lean into some really bright, vibrant oranges, but reserve plenty of white that I can use to balance out the intensity of the color. And of course, I'm going to pull these bright oranges throughout a couple other parts in my painting so they don't feel out of place. And the last step for this beak is a light, transparent layer of yellow. At this point in the process, everything is really developed, and now I'm looking at what I can do to take this one step further. I noticed that these bright greens over on the side are a little too intense, so I'm going to mix up a neutral green and use this to subdue those greens over on the right. I do this with a combination of permanent yellow, Prussian blue, and a bit of burnt umber. After I'm happy with how those greens work over on the right, I continue to look throughout the background, making sure that everything works together. This is that last 10% of the background, and I'm also jumping into the peacock if I need to make sure that everything works together for the final piece. And now this piece is complete. I hope you learned a ton about working with gouache and color mixing, and we can't wait to see what you create. So be sure to use the hashtag SketchBoxNovember when you post your work online. For more unboxing videos and tutorials, you can check out our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.